Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for August through November. Great Basin fire activity continues to increase across the Great Basin with numerous large fires up in central Idaho, down in southern and northeast Utah, and in northwest Nevada, with new fires nearly every day. Over the last 7 to 14 days, we've continued to see some above normal precipitation over central areas of the Great Basin from southern Idaho into far northern Nevada and northwest Utah. But otherwise, the periphery of the Great Basin has generally seen below normal precipitation. Certainly, the monsoon has not been significant this year. It's been very weak and very sporadic with the moisture. Over the last 30 days, we've seen warm temperatures across really all of the West. And again, below normal precipitation around most of the periphery of the Great Basin and just that swath of near or above normal precipitation in northern Nevada, northwest Utah, and parts of southern Idaho. However, we are coming off of 2 months of very warm temperatures. We've had several heat waves throughout June and July in the West. You can see June was above normal for the Great Basin, and July continued to be above normal as well. Looking at the percent of average precipitation since October 1st, you can see just some areas of southern Idaho, northern Nevada, and northwest Utah have seen near normal or just above normal precipitation with below normal around the rest of the region. And looking at since the beginning of April, we've seen very dry conditions, really going from April through July has seen generally drier than normal conditions in most areas. And that precipitation we did see that occurred in the winter and springtime is what was really responsible for our above normal fine fuel loading. We entered the fire season with very little, if any, drought in the area. And now, since we've had 2 or 3 months of warm and drier conditions in some areas, we've seen drought develop across the Great Basin. This yellow area is mainly abnormally dry, but we are seeing pockets of moderate drought pop up now from northern Utah into Idaho and Wyoming. And you can see from the drought outlook, we are expecting the drought to possibly intensify or remain or even develop further over the northern half of the Great Basin. Looking at the shorter term drought, are more of a representative of flash drought. You can see with the hot, dry conditions we've seen in the West, many areas seeing much drier conditions over the last few weeks in the West. But for the Great Basin, it's mainly from central Idaho into northwest Nevada. And looking at how we look at drought and how it affects our fire seasons, these areas of no drought or very little drought in the black boxes is where we see our well above normal or above median acres burned, at least in the lower elevation BLM lands. So again, we're seeing more grass grow in these scenarios where we have less drought, and so fire spreads very rapidly, growing in size very quickly. These areas of significant drought, we don't see necessarily above normal acreage across the Great Basin, but we still have problematic fires and significant fires mainly in the higher elevations. And you can see where we still are is even with these abnormally dry conditions in some areas of moderate drought developing, still in this scenario of a very active fire season, which you've already seen start, and we are expecting that to continue. So looking at our fuel conditions, the fine fuel conditions, this image on the left shows the estimated, this is a model estimation, taking in all factors environmentally, of standing dead fine fuel and the fine fuel growth going into this fire season. And you can see we are seeing generally above normal fine fuel loading or the heavier fine fuel loading in southern Idaho, northern Nevada, and parts of northwest Utah. And we have seen that in ground truth from our fuel specialists as well, as these are the areas that we have seen higher fuel loading than we are in areas further south. The image on the right shows the invasive species, so our cheatgrass coverage. It doesn't necessarily translate to loading. However, as far as coverage, high continuity in these areas of western and northwest Nevada, part of the Snake River Plain, and parts of western Utah. So even in areas where on the fuel loading map they are not super high, we are seeing quite a bit of continuity, which again enhances fire spread. Looking at some of our fuel conditions, our 10-hour fuel moistures, very dry with our grasses with this recent warm and dry conditions, anywhere over the eastern half of Nevada and much of Utah. Definitely some better conditions up in central Idaho with recent moisture, but that will likely change in the coming days very rapidly. 100-hour fuel moisture is definitely critical across the area, but driest over the southern 2/3 of the region. And similarly, we are seeing 1,000-hour fuel moisture still critically dry over many areas of the Great Basin. Our current ERC point map shows where our ERCs are the highest, which is much of Utah. And again, because we've had a very weak monsoon, moisture that we would have seen throughout July just did not materialize, or at least was not as consistent, and certainly not as heavy as what we would normally see. So ERCs are quite a bit higher than this time normally, this time of year. And still seeing higher ERCs along the Sierra front up into northwest Nevada and into parts of central and eastern Idaho and Wyoming. These areas that are showing in the green or the yellow below the 70th percentile are areas that have seen recent moisture, but that again, we will see drier conditions moving in, so we do anticipate these ERCs to continue to rise. Looking at some of our ERC charts, you can see over eastern Idaho, ERCs have come down with the recent moisture, but the green line is the projection for the next 7 days. So going into early August, we are expecting warmer and drier, very hot conditions, even some record temperatures, to really accelerate the rise in these ERCs to near record values for the time of year. Looking over southern Utah, again, we're seeing higher ERCs, but we will see some moisture moving in to drop those a little bit, which would, again, be expected this time of year. So looking at the precipitation for the first week of August, definitely seeing very spotty areas as moisture returns in the first couple days of August from the south and moves across the Great Basin. Very limited moisture across much of Nevada into Idaho and Wyoming, with again more of a broad brush of these thunderstorms quickly moving north, with the deeper moisture well to the south. The only areas of the Great Basin that might see a little bit better chance of wetting rains will be parts of the Arizona Strip into southern Utah. Looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook, showing still warm temperatures across much of the Great Basin, and this is taking us from August 8th through the 14th. A better chance of some above normal precipitation in Utah, but that's probably where it will be limited. Not super confident in this above normal precipitation into Nevada or into Idaho towards the middle of August. Looking at the 4-month outlook, temperatures in the top row, still looking at warm conditions for the Great Basin until we get later in the fall. And then precipitation still abnormally dry for August, September, so still expecting that monsoon to continue to be weak and only small pulses of moisture moving up at times, but really not expecting any above normal precipitation from the monsoon. Then as we get into September, October, still dry conditions, especially over the eastern half of the Great Basin later in the fall. We may see a better potential of moisture and troughs to move in to give us above normal precipitation for parts of the western and northern half of the Great Basin going into October and November. So putting everything together, our 4-month outlook really for August and September really has not changed much. Still expecting above normal potential over much of the northern half of the Great Basin through September, which matches well with our neighbors in the Northwest and in California. Again, concerned with the lack of moisture, dry conditions, the above normal grass growth in the lower elevations, especially as we get into the fall, with more cold fronts moving in, bringing us windier periods, and then still these pulses of moisture coming up through the monsoon in August, giving us chances at lightning, but not overall significant amounts of precipitation. Otherwise, normal conditions for southern areas of the Great Basin and Utah, as that is where the better chance as we see thunderstorms where we will get higher humidity and moisture. And then returning to normal region-wide going into October, November, with the anticipation that we will see some of that moisture finally move into Idaho and western and northern Nevada. That concludes our webcast for the seasonal outlook for the month. Check back next month for the latest updates.